I still remember the sound of the knock. It wasn't like any normal knock, it was slow, deliberate, and filled with a kind of authority that immediately sent chills through my body. I had just come home from work, tired and hungry, and the last thing I expected was trouble. But that knock, it felt like the beginning of something I couldn't escape. When I opened the door, a man stood there in a crisp police uniform. His expression was cold, calculated. His eyes didn't wander, they locked straight onto mine. "Good evening, sir," he said in a voice that sounded both official and rehearsed. "I'm Officer Daniels from the County Police Department. I'm here to inform you that you're being evicted from this property." For a second, I thought it was some kind of sick joke. "Evicted? What are you talking about? This is my house." I laughed nervously, waiting for him to explain. But he didn't laugh. He pulled out a folded document from his jacket and held it out to me. "This notice was issued by the Homeowners Association. They've filed a complaint stating that you've been in violation of multiple housing regulations and have failed to respond to repeated warnings." I stared at the paper, confused. I was part of the HOA, sure, but I'd never missed a payment, never received any warning. "This doesn't make any sense," I said, scanning the page. It had an official seal, some signatures, and legal jargon I didn't understand. He tilted his head slightly. "Sir, I don't make the rules, I just enforce them. You have until midnight to vacate the property or you'll be forcibly removed." My heart started racing. Midnight? That was less than 6 hours away. "Wait, hold on," I said, stepping forward. "I've lived here for 8 years. I've never had a problem with the HOA. I think there's been some kind of mistake." But his expression didn't change. He simply gave me that same look, calm, unbothered, as if this was just another day at work. Then he turned and walked toward his car, leaving me standing there with the eviction notice trembling in my hands. I remember how the neighborhood looked that evening. The sky was a deep orange, the sun melting behind the tall pines, and the air was heavy. My neighbor, Linda, was watering her plants across the street. She waved at me, smiling, until she noticed the uniformed officer walking away from my house. Her face dropped. "Everything okay, Tom?" she called out. I forced a smile. "Yeah, just some confusion with the HOA." But I knew it was okay. Something was wrong, deeply wrong. Inside, my wife Emily was setting the table for dinner. The smell of lasagna filled the air, warm and comforting. For a moment, I almost forgot about the letter in my hand, but when she saw my face, her smile vanished. "What's wrong?" she asked, wiping her hands on a towel. I handed her the paper. "Apparently, we're being evicted tonight." Her eyes widened as she read it. "Evicted? That's insane. We paid our dues last week." "I know," I said, packing. "But this guy showed up, said he's with the county police. He had a badge, uniform, the whole thing." Emily frowned. "Did you call the HOA office?" "Not yet," I admitted. My hands were shaking. I wanted to see what this letter actually says. She scanned it again and then froze. "Tom, look at this." She pointed to the bottom of the page where the HOA president's signature was printed, Richard Bell. Richard, our neighbor, the man who lived 3 houses down. I'd known Richard for years. He was polite, always smiling, the kind of guy who brought cookies to board meetings. But something about seeing his name there made my stomach twist. "Why would Richard do this?" I muttered. "We've never had any issues." Emily looked up at me, her eyes filled with fear. "Maybe you should call the police, real police." I nodded. "Yeah, that's probably a good idea." When I called the local police department, the woman on the line sounded puzzled. "Officer Daniels," she repeated. "We don't have anyone by that name." My breath caught in my throat. "You're sure?" "I'm looking right at the roster," she said. "No Daniels here, and we don't handle HOA evictions. That's a civil matter." I hung up the phone, my hands trembling. The man who came to my door, he wasn't a real cop. Emily's face went pale when I told her. "Then who was he?" she whispered. I didn't know, but the realization hit me like a truck. Someone had sent a fake police officer to scare us out of our own home, and that someone might be our own HOA. That night I couldn't sleep. Every noise outside made me jump. Around midnight I looked through the blinds and saw a black sedan parked across the street. No lights, no movement, just sitting there, watching. I told myself I was being paranoid, but then the car's headlights flashed once, just once, as if signaling. The next morning I drove straight to the HOA office. It was a small, beige building at the end of the neighborhood park. When I walked in, the receptionist looked up and smiled politely. "Good morning, how can I help you?" "I need to speak to Richard Bell," I said, my voice firm. She frowned. "Mr. Bell isn't in today. Is there something I can help you with?" "Yeah," I said, holding up the letter. "You can tell me why someone dressed as a police officer showed up at my house last night and handed me this." Her eyes flicked over the paper and I saw something in her expression, something she tried to hide. "Oh, that must be a misunderstanding," she said quickly. "Sometimes the HOA hires third-party enforcement officers." "Enforcement officers?" I interrupted. "This guy claimed he was a police officer. He had a gun, a badge." She hesitated. "I'm sure there's been some confusion. If you'd like, I can schedule a meeting with Mr. Bell when he returns." I leaned closer. "You knew about this, didn't you?" Her eyes darted toward the security camera in the corner. "Sir, please lower your voice." That's when I realized this wasn't a misunderstanding, it was organized. I left the office furious. The autumn wind was sharp, carrying dry leaves across the pavement. My hands were clenched so tight they hurt. When I got home, Emily was waiting at the door. "You need to see this," she said, her voice trembling. She handed me her phone. There was a post on our neighborhood Facebook group. Someone had uploaded a picture of our house with the caption, "Finally, the HOA is taking care of the troublemakers." The comments below were worse. "About time they got what's coming. Hope they kick him out for good. Should have followed the rules like everyone else. Troublemakers, I'd never done anything wrong." I scrolled through, heart pounding, until I saw Richard Bell's name. His comment said, "Sometimes we have to take matters into our own hands." That's when I knew this wasn't just about rules, it was personal. I called Richard that afternoon, no answer. I called again, nothing. Finally, I walked down to his house. His silver SUV was in the driveway. I knocked. No response, but as I turned to leave, the door opened slightly and I heard his voice. "Tom, this isn't a good time." I pushed the door open wider. "You sent someone to my house last night pretending to be a cop." His expression didn't even flicker. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't lie to me," I snapped. "Your name on the eviction notice. You had someone in uniform threaten my family." He sighed and stepped outside, closing the door behind him. "Look, Tom, the board voted. You've been in violation for months." "What violation?" I demanded. "Unauthorized property changes, complaints about noise, improper waste disposal. It's all in the record." "That's ridiculous," I said. "We've done nothing wrong." Richard gave me a look I'll never forget, cold, almost pitying. "Sometimes it's not about right or wrong, Tom, it's about order." Then he walked back inside, leaving me standing there stunned. That night someone slashed my car tires, all four. I reported it, of course. The real police came this time. They took photos, wrote a report, but said there wasn't much they could do without security footage. Emily was terrified. "We can't stay here," she whispered as we watched from the window. "What if they come back?" But I refused to be driven out. "No, this is our home. I'm not letting them win." Over the next few days, things got worse. Letters appeared in our mailbox, unsigned, typed on plain paper. "Leave while you still can. You don't belong here anymore. We warned you." One night, our porch light flickered and went out. When I stepped outside to check it, I noticed something carved into the wooden post by the steps. It was one word: "out." That was the moment I realized this wasn't just harassment. It was a campaign. Someone or several people wanted us gone, and they were willing to go to any lengths. The following morning, I installed cameras around the property. Every corner, every angle. Emily thought it was overkill, but deep down, I think she was relieved. A few nights later, around 2 a.m., one of the cameras pinged an alert on my phone. I opened the app and froze. There he was, the same fake police officer, standing in our driveway. He wasn't alone this time. Another man, dressed in dark clothes, stood beside him, pointing at our front door. They didn't notice the camera. After a minute, the officer raised his hand and gestured toward the side of the house. Then they disappeared from view. My heart was pounding so hard I could barely think. I grabbed the baseball bat from under my bed and went downstairs. Emily whispered, "Tom, what are you doing?" "Call the police," I said. When I reached the living room, everything was silent, too silent. Then, from outside came the sound of footsteps crunching on gravel. I slowly peeked through the window. The two men were standing near the back fence, whispering. One of them shone a flashlight along the siding of the house as if they were looking for something. Suddenly they both looked up, straight toward the camera. And the feed went black. Emily screamed upstairs when the power cut out. The whole house went dark. I ran to the breaker box, fumbling in the dark, trying to restore the power. But before I could touch it, I heard a loud thud from the front door. Someone was trying to break in. I ran to the stairs. Emily, get in the bedroom and lock the door. The thudding grew louder, then came the sound of splintering wood. I gripped the bat tighter, my breath shallow. The door burst open and a beam of light swept across the hallway. "Police, step away from the stairs," a voice shouted. I froze. "You're not the police," I said, my voice shaking. The light moved closer, blinding me. Last warning. I could hear Emily sobbing upstairs. Every instinct told me to run, but something inside me snapped. I wasn't going to let them take everything. I swung the bat as hard as I could. There was a shout, a crash, and then silence. When I blinked through the haze, I saw the fake officer sprawled on the floor, groaning. The other man bolted out the door. I picked up the officer's dropped badge and looked at it under the faint light from the street. It was plastic, a toy. Before I could process what happened, flashing red and blue lights filled the street. This time it was real police. But when they entered, saw the unconscious man on the floor and me holding the bat, everything suddenly flipped against me. "Sir, drop the weapon." I tried to explain, to tell them he was fake, but when they searched him, they found nothing but a fake badge, a gun loaded with blanks, and a phone filled with messages from a contact saved as RB. Richard Bell. As they cuffed the man, he glared at me through swollen eyes. "You should have left when you had the chance." I stood there speechless. And then, from the corner of the yard, through the flashing lights, I saw Richard standing there in his robe, watching. I wanted to shout at him, to tell the officers right there that the man watching us was the one behind all of it. But as soon as our eyes met, Richard turned and calmly walked back toward his house as if nothing had happened. The real officers questioned me until dawn. They asked about the break-in, the fake cop, the letters, the threats. I told them everything, every small detail. One of them, a tall man named Officer Ray, flipped through the fake badge in his gloved hand and sighed. "Looks like this was made on a home printer, not exactly professional work." "So what happens now?" I asked. "We'll hold him overnight, but unless he talks, it's going to be tough linking this to anyone else." "He'll talk," I said. "He has messages from Richard Bell." Ray nodded slowly. "We'll subpoena the phone records. Sit tight for now, don't leave town." When the sun finally rose, I felt like I hadn't slept in a year. The air outside was crisp and colorless, the kind of cold morning that made your breath look like smoke. Emily met me at the door as I came inside, her eyes red from crying. "Are they arresting him?" she asked. "For now, but I don't know how long," I admitted. "They said it depends on what they can prove." She leaned against me, her voice trembling. "I just want this to stop." I held her close. "It will, I promise." But even as I said it, I wasn't sure I believed it. The next few days were strangely quiet. No new letters, no cars parked outside. Even the neighbors seemed to avoid eye contact. It was like everyone had agreed to pretend nothing happened. Then 3 nights later, I received a call. "Mr. Turner, this is Officer Ray. We just got a statement from the man who attacked your home." My pulse quickened. "What did he say?" "He claims he was hired by someone in your HOA, says he was paid in cash, no records. We're trying to confirm the details, but—" Ray paused. "Something about this doesn't add up." "What do you mean?" "Well," he said, "we checked Richard Bell's phone and financials. He's clean. No evidence he paid anyone, nothing suspicious at all. It's like your attacker wanted us to think Richard was behind it." That didn't make sense. Richard's name was literally on the eviction notice. Why would someone else try to frame him? I spent that night packing the living room, replaying everything in my head. What if Richard wasn't the mastermind? What if the fake cop was just part of something larger, something the HOA wanted buried? The next morning, I decided to dig deeper. Emily begged me not to. Tom, let the police handle it, she said. You've done enough. But I couldn't stop. If I don't find out who did this, they'll just do it again to us or someone else. I started with public records, property taxes, HOA documents, financial filings. Most of it was boring, but then I noticed something strange. Over the past year, the HOA had made several maintenance disbursements to a company called Pineway Services LLC. I'd never heard of it. The payments were huge, tens of thousands of dollars. When I tried to look up the company, it didn't exist. No website, no address, just a post office box in another county. That's when I knew I was onto something. I went to the HOA office again. This time I walked in with a different tone, firm, direct. The receptionist looked nervous as soon as she saw me. I need to see the financial reports for the last 2 years, I said. Those are confidential, sir. Not for members, they're not, I replied. The bylaws say any homeowner can request access to budget records. Her lips tightened. I'll need to ask Mr. Bell for approval. Then ask him, I said. She left the desk for a moment and returned with a stack of folders. I thanked her and sat down in the lobby. As I flipped through the papers, I noticed multiple payments approved by 3 signatures, the HOA treasurer, secretary, and president. But the treasurer's signature looked off as if copied and pasted. I decided to visit the treasurer myself, a quiet man named George who lived a few streets over. His house looked neglected, paint peeling, grass uncut. When I knocked, he answered in a stained undershirt, blinking in surprise. Tom, what brings you here? I need to ask you about the HOA records, I said. Did you approve payments to Pineway Services? He looked confused. Pineway what? The company receiving thousands in maintenance funds, I said. He frowned. I never signed anything like that. I showed him the copies of the records. His face went pale. That's not my signature. Then who forged it? I asked. He hesitated. Tom, listen, you don't want to get involved in this. People on the board, they're not who you think they are. What do you mean? He looked around nervously, then whispered, Richard's just the face. He doesn't run things, someone else does. Who? George shook his head. If I tell you, they'll come after me too. He started closing the door. George, please, my family's in danger. He stopped. For a moment I thought he'd refuse, but then he sighed and leaned closer. Her name's Ellen Marks. She owns the management company that runs the HOA. Everything goes through her. I didn't recognize the name, but it stuck in my mind. Ellen Marks. That evening, I looked her up. She was listed as the CEO of Everwood Community Management, a firm that oversaw dozens of neighborhood associations across the state. Her picture showed a perfectly composed woman in her 50s, smiling behind glassy eyes. Emily walked in as I stared at her photo. Who's that? The real person behind all this, I said. At least that's what George told me. She sighed. Tom, please, let's just move, sell the house and start over somewhere else. I looked at her, my chest tight. If we leave, they win, and whoever this woman is, she'll keep doing it to others. I can't just walk away. A week later, I got my chance. The HOA announced its quarterly board meeting open to residents. It was scheduled for Thursday evening in the community center. I knew Richard and the others would be there, maybe even Ellen Marks. That night, the room was packed. Neighbors sat in folding chairs, whispering. At the front table sat Richard, the secretary, and 2 other board members. I recognized the tension in their faces when I entered. Richard cleared his throat. Let's begin. Tonight we'll discuss upcoming maintenance budgets and... I stood up. Before you do, I'd like to ask a question. He frowned. This isn't the time for... It's about Pineway Services, I said loudly. The room fell silent. What's that supposed to mean? Richard asked, trying to sound calm. Your records show tens of thousands of dollars paid to a fake company, and the treasurer's signature was forged. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Richard's jaw tightened. Mr. Turner, you're out of line. No, I'm not, I said. You sent someone pretending to be a cop to drive me out of my home. You forged documents and I have proof. Richard stood abruptly. That's a serious accusation. Then explain it, I said, holding up the folder. Explain why these checks were approved by Ellen Marks, who doesn't even live here. The name hit him like a punch. His face drained of color. Suddenly, a voice came from the back of the room. calm, measured, unmistakably female, because I authorized them. Everyone turned. A woman stepped forward, heels clicking against the floor. She was exactly like her photo, immaculate, confident, Ellen Marks. "I manage this community," she said smoothly, "and those payments were for contracted work." "To a company that doesn't exist?" I asked. She smiled. "You don't understand how these things work, Mr. Turner. Sometimes subcontractors operate under holding entities. It's perfectly legal." "Legal?" I said, my voice rising. "You hired a fake police officer to threaten my family." Murmurs filled the room. Ellen didn't flinch. "That's a dangerous accusation," she said softly. "Be careful what you say." "I have proof," I said, pulling out the printed phone messages. "This man had contact with someone labeled RB, that's Richard Bell, and you." Ellen interrupted, her voice sharp now. "The police already cleared Mr. Bell. You're chasing ghosts, Mr. Turner. Maybe it's time you move on for everyone's sake." For a moment, everything went quiet. Then, to my shock, several board members nodded in agreement. That's when I realized how deep this went. The meeting ended in chaos. I walked out with shaking hands, half the neighborhood staring. Emily waited in the car, eyes full of worry. "What happened?" she asked. I just whispered, "They're all in on it." The following day, our security cameras caught something new. A man same build as the fake officer walked past the house again, but this time he wasn't in uniform. He was wearing a maintenance jacket with a logo I recognized, Everwood Community Management. He wasn't gone, he just changed roles. That night, as rain poured over the rooftops, I got another envelope under the door. No return address, no signature. Inside was a single sheet of paper with 5 words. "Stop digging or lose everything." Emily broke down crying when she saw it. "Tom, please, they mean it, we have to go." I stared at the paper for a long time before finally speaking. "No, if they want to scare me, they'll have to do better than this." But deep inside, I knew something terrible was coming. The next morning, my car was gone, not vandalized, not moved, gone, vanished from the driveway. When I called the police, they said it hadn't been towed, it hadn't even been reported stolen, it just disappeared. That's when I realized the HOA didn't just want me out, they were erasing me piece by piece. And I was running out of time. Smiling, I woke up the next morning to the sound of pounding on the front door again. For a split second, my heart froze. The memory of that fake officer's voice still echoed in my head. Emily gripped my arm, whispering, "Don't open it." But this time, when I looked through the peephole, it wasn't a uniform. It was Officer Ray, the real one. I opened the door carefully. He stood there, drenched from the rain, holding a folder under his arm. "Morning, Tom, we need to talk." I let him in, and he immediately looked around, scanning the room like a man expecting trouble. "You weren't answering your phone," he said. "I turned it off last night," I admitted. "Too many calls from unknown numbers." He nodded slowly. "Yeah, I bet you've been making people nervous." "People like who?" He sighed. "Let's just say your HOA isn't happy you've been digging into their finances, and they're not small-time crooks. They've got connections, political, legal, financial. You're stepping into something that might get ugly." I rubbed my forehead. "They already sent thugs to my house. How much uglier can it get?" Ray hesitated, then opened the folder he was carrying. Inside were printed photos, security cam stills, police evidence tags, bank statements. "We ran a trace on the payments from the HOA account," he said. "They don't go to Pineway Services directly, they go through a chain of shell companies and end up here." He pointed to a name circled in red ink, Everwood Community Holdings, CEO, Ellen Marks. I stared at it, my chest tightening. "So she's laundering money through the HOA." "Looks that way," Ray said. "Maintenance contracts, service fees, even security patrols, all fake invoices. It's a front." "And the fake officer?" Ray flipped another page. "We can't link him directly to her yet, but we know he's ex-security, used to work for one of her subsidiaries before he disappeared off payroll. That's how she keeps her hands clean." I sat back numb. "So what do we do now?" "You let us handle it," he said. "No more digging, no more confronting people. We'll build a case." But I couldn't shake the feeling that waiting would only make things worse. Later that afternoon, as Emily tried to nap upstairs, I walked outside to get some air. The neighborhood was eerily still, lawns trimmed, mailboxes polished like nothing had ever happened. But behind that perfection I could feel something rotten. That's when I noticed it. A white SUV parked down the block, windows tinted black. It had the Everwood logo on the side. I could see a silhouette in the driver's seat, watching. I pretended to take out the trash and glanced again. The engine was running. They weren't even hiding anymore. I walked back inside, trying to act normal, but Emily saw my face and knew. They're watching us again, aren't they? I didn't answer, I just drew the curtains. That night I got an email, no subject line, just a message. Last warning, Tom, leave the house by Sunday or it won't just be your car next time. The sender's address was hidden behind a VPN, but the tone was clear. Emily broke when she read it. Tom, please, she begged, tears in her eyes. We can go stay with my sister, we don't have to live like this. I wanted to say yes. God, I wanted to, but something inside me, maybe pride, maybe anger, kept saying no. If we leave, they win, I said again, and what happens to everyone else who can't fight back? She didn't argue, she just walked away silently, shutting the bedroom door behind her. That silence hurt more than the threats ever could. The next morning, I decided to do something reckless. I drove, using a rental car this time, to the Everwood Community Management headquarters 2 towns over. A sleek glass building, polished and professional, the kind of place that screamed legitimacy. At the front desk, I introduced myself as a homeowner from one of their managed neighborhoods. The receptionist smiled politely. Do you have an appointment with Ms. Marks? No, I said, forcing a calm tone, but it's urgent. She gave me a look that said, you're not the first. I'm sorry, sir, Ms. Marks doesn't take unscheduled meetings. Then tell her Tom Turner is here, I said, leaning slightly forward, and tell her it's about Pineway Services. That got her attention. She froze, eyes flicking toward the security guard near the elevator. Please wait here a moment. 5 minutes later, 2 men in suits appeared. Mr. Turner, one asked, Ms. Marks is unavailable, we'll escort you out. Sure, I said, but tell her this, if she doesn't stop what she's doing, the police will. One of the men smirked. You should be careful, Mr. Turner, you're starting to sound paranoid. As they guided me outside, I realized they weren't security. Their hands never left their jackets, and one of them had an earpiece, private protection. Ellen Marks had her own army. That night, I got home to find the front door slightly open. My stomach dropped. I rushed inside, drawers pulled out, papers scattered. Emily's voice came from upstairs, panicked. Tom, they were here. I ran up and found her sitting on the floor holding a smashed photo frame. The picture inside, our wedding photo, had been cut right through the middle, the glass cracked. They didn't take anything, she said, trembling. They just wanted to scare us. It worked. The next morning, we found a small envelope on the porch. Inside was a flash drive. No note, no markings, just that. I plugged it into my laptop, heart pounding. A video file opened automatically. It was security footage from inside the HOA office. The video showed Richard Bell sitting at the boardroom table with Ellen Marks. She slid a document toward him. Are you sure about this one? Richard asked nervously. Ellen smiled faintly. He's been asking too many questions. A firm example keeps the rest quiet. Richard hesitated, and the officer. Already taken care of, she said. He'll deliver the notice tonight. After that, it's his problem. The clip ended there. I sat frozen, replaying the words over and over. A firm example, that's what this was. I was the example. Emily's voice broke through my shock. We have to give this to the police. I nodded, shaking. Yeah, right now. We drove straight to the station and handed everything over to Officer Ray. He watched the footage silently, his expression darkening. This is huge, he said finally. We can use this, but you two need to stay somewhere safe. He arranged temporary protection for us in a nearby motel under new names. It felt strange, hiding like fugitives from our own neighborhood, but for the first time in weeks, we actually slept through the night. The following morning, Ray called. We're moving in on them today, he said. We've got a warrant for Ellen Marks and several members of the HOA board. Will keep you updated. Emily and I clung to each other, relief washing over us. It was almost over. But by evening, Ray called again. This time his tone was grim. "Tom, Ellen's gone." "What do you mean gone?" "She cleared out her office, wiped her servers, vanished. No sign of her or Richard Bell. The air left my lungs." "You're saying they escaped?" "For now," he said quietly, "but we'll find them." After the call, Emily sat in silence, staring at the wall. "So we went through all that for nothing." I put my arm around her. "Not for nothing. The truth's out now. The police have the footage. They can't hide forever." But deep inside, I wasn't sure. A week later, the HOA announced temporary leadership changes and promised transparency going forward. The neighborhood returned to its perfect calm, but I knew better. Sometimes evil doesn't vanish, it just changes faces. One evening, as I checked the mail, I found a plain white envelope addressed to me. No stamp, no return address. Inside was a single sentence typed on clean paper. "You might have won the battle, Tom, but the house still belongs to us." I looked up slowly. Across the street, the porch light of Richard Bell's house flicked on, then off. Someone was still there, watching, waiting. And I finally realized this wasn't over. I didn't even feel the pain at first, just the silence. The kind of silence that hums after thunder. When I opened my eyes, the paramedics were already there, voices overlapping, flashlights cutting through the night. My neighbor Mark was shouting something about an intruder, pretending he'd seen me attack someone, but I couldn't even lift my arm. The fake cop's uniform was ripped open beside me, exposing a black hoodie underneath. No badge, no real ID, just a printed patch. They rushed me to the hospital that night. While I lay in the emergency room, all I could think about was my house. My home, my father's old clock in the hallway, the smell of my mother's rose garden outside the window. Everything I loved sat behind that door, and now the HOA had nearly killed me trying to take it away. When I woke up, a real officer was standing beside my bed. He asked if I knew why someone dressed as a police officer had been in my home. I told him everything: the fake eviction, the forged notice, the threats from the HOA board, even how they'd locked me out. He took notes quietly, his eyes narrowing as I spoke. Then he said something that froze me completely. "Sir, the HOA you're talking about doesn't have legal authority to conduct any eviction, but this case. It's not the first one in your neighborhood." Apparently, several homeowners had reported strange incidents over the past 6 months. Random inspections that turned into harassment. Surprise fees for repairs that were never done, and now, fake police officers showing up to enforce illegal evictions. It was a pattern, but no one had connected the dots until now. I asked him if he could protect me, or at least my property. He hesitated before saying, "We'll do what we can, but these people know how to cover their tracks." When I was released, I returned home only to find the locks changed again. My mailbox was stuffed with new legal notices from the HOA, each one stamped with a fake seal. My lawn had been torn up. The garden, my mother's roses, was gone, dug out completely. A small sign stood in their place: property under HOA maintenance. That's when I noticed the cameras, small, black, and perfectly hidden in the corners of the porch. They weren't mine. I pulled one out of the wall and flipped it over. The serial number led to a private security company owned by the HOA president's brother. They'd been watching me. That night, I decided to record everything. Every knock on the door, every strange sound, every letter. I set up my own cameras, hidden inside the vents and near the fence. If they came back, I'd have proof. Days passed without incident, but the feeling of being watched never left. My lights flickered at odd hours. The Wi-Fi would go down whenever I tried to upload footage. My phone showed missed calls from city enforcement, a number that didn't exist. Then one night around 2 a.m. I heard footsteps on the porch again. Slow, deliberate. I stayed quiet, watching through my monitor. 3 figures stood outside, one of them holding a flashlight, another with a clipboard. The man in front wore the same fake badge as before. I stepped outside before they could knock. My voice shook, but I forced it out. "You're trespassing, leave now." The man smirked, tapping his fake badge. "Sir, the HOA has deemed this property unsafe for habitation. We're authorized to remove you." "Authorized by who?" I asked. "Your costume supplier." For a second, I thought I saw fear in his eyes. Then he turned, motioning to the others. They started toward the back door. That's when I shouted, "I've been recording everything. You step 1 foot inside and the police will have you all by sunrise." They froze. The man with the clipboard muttered something, and within seconds they retreated down the driveway. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the camera. The next morning, the HOA sent an email short and cold. We advise against false allegations, legal action pending. I knew they were bluffing, so I went to the real police department, handed over my footage, and waited. Weeks passed and I heard nothing. It felt like the system itself was too scared to move against them. Until one afternoon, a black SUV pulled up outside my house. A woman stepped out wearing a city investigator badge. Her tone was professional but tense. "Mr. Carter, I've been assigned to review your case. I need to see everything you have: video, documents, emails." I showed her everything from the fake notices to the night recordings. As she watched, her face hardened. "These uniforms," she said, pausing the video, "they were used in another case 2 towns over. Same style, same false department name. Whoever's behind this has done it before." She left with copies of my footage, promising to escalate it to the state level. For the first time in months, I felt a flicker of hope. But that night, my security cameras went dark. All of them. Someone had cut the power from outside. When I stepped onto the porch, I found a single envelope taped to the door. Inside, there was just one photo: me asleep in my bed. On the back, a handwritten message: "You should have just moved." That's when I realized this wasn't about property anymore. It was about control. They wanted to break me, to make me disappear quietly like the others who had complained. But I wasn't going anywhere. I packed my things, installed backup power for my cameras, and called the investigator again. No answer. I called the police department, no record of her badge number. Panic started to crawl up my spine. Who was that woman? Was she even real, or just another actor in their elaborate game? Days turned into sleepless nights. Every sound felt like a threat. Every car that slowed in front of my house made my heart race. I couldn't keep living like that, so I made one last decision. If they wanted me gone, they'd have to do it in daylight. I invited every neighbor who had ever complained about the HOA to a meeting in my front yard. Some came hesitantly, others peeked from their windows. I told them everything about the fake police, the threats, the photos, the missing investigator. One of the older residents, Mrs. Thompson, started crying. She said her grandson had been arrested by those same fake officers months ago for trespassing on his own property. The HOA took over her home soon after, claiming it was abandoned. It wasn't just me, it was all of us. We decided to take it public, upload everything, every clip, every document to the internet. We created a folder labeled HOA Corruption and shared it everywhere. Within hours, it spread like wildfire. But just when I thought we'd won, something unexpected happened. The next morning, every one of us received the same email from an unknown address. It said, "You've made a mistake. The HOA isn't who you think we are." No logo, no name, just a single attachment, a video file titled "Before You Go Further." When I opened it, my blood ran cold. It was footage from inside my house. Not the living room, not the hallway, my bedroom. The camera angle was from above my bed, showing me sleeping again. But this time I wasn't alone. A figure stood in the corner, motionless, watching. And the timestamp on the video, it was from last night. That's where everything changed, because from that moment I stopped being scared of losing my house. I realized I was fighting something far darker than the HOA, something that knew every move I made, every breath I took inside my own home. And I was finally ready to find out who or what it really was.